Lynn, you've had a direct mystical experience of oneness. Could you describe what led to this experience and the nature of this experience?
Well, I can't really say what led to this experience, because I think when you have the kind of experience that I had, that there's like a divine intervention. That, yes, you know, I studied in metaphysics and I made an effort, and I was always interested in the truth and what would set me free. But I think the experience I had actually came through some grace of some kind. I can't really tell people I made this effort. You know, I studied 6 hours a day. I read scriptures. I looked at all the wisdom traditions. I, you know, studied science to see about oneness or unity, but I didn't call it that then. I was interested in the dichotomy between chaos and order. And that's what led me to the oneness, because I had always thought that there wasn't really any such thing as chaos. I'd always thought that my perception was so limited that I couldn't see into that chaos to see how it was actually ordered. And I was a painter, so that's what my work was about. It was about this quality of dichotomy between two concepts in art. And they could have been called, let's say, abstract expressionism for sort of the chaos part. And then there was that very geometric time in the 50s with art. And even in the 70s, some of what was going on had, people were using the secret geometries to try to organize space and that kind of thing. So I actually first came to the concept of oneness through my painting. And it was through trying to solve, you know, what I thought was just my limited vision, my inability to really perceive with any depth reality. So through my art, I tried to change my perception so that I could see what this oneness actually was. So that's the initial effort that I would say that I made. And then I started studying metaphysics, and I became interested in that by studying certain authors that worked with the principle of light, but sometimes from a scientific point of view, but also from an artist's point of view. What happens when you put this color next to this color, and how you change depths of field with color, those kinds of things. So I started to become interested in the principle of light and how it really worked. So that was my initial effort that I made. It brought me into metaphysics, and so now I was in the world of truth. You know, what is in back of and behind my superficial relative truth that was part of my conditioning, or what I had learned in school, or what came from my family, or so on and so forth. So I actually started stripping down a structure and building up a structure at the same time. And later I realized I was using principles of unity and oneness in order to do this. I would have never ever called it that then. It was only later when the dynamic started to become, in quotes, a bit more spiritual or mystical, where my consciousness was actually being altered by changing my concepts of God, self, life. You know, so I was using wisdom, beauty, goodness, science, art, religion to find my way really home. I was just trying to get home, was the goal of all of this, even though I didn't have a concept of what home was. So in a way, when I say home, I guess I could say oneness also. This particular quality or state of consciousness and being, that you know that you are interconnected, that it is a whole and you're not separate from it or apart from it. But in the beginning, it didn't have a concept that I would say was spiritual or mystical or religious. It was definitely had to do with my art and how I was unfolding and investigating certain principles in art. Space, form, light, that kind of thing.
But you had a experience that followed
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
work as an artist.
But I think it was, I can't tell people that directly caused
Right.
what happened to me. Because within this concept that was sort of unfolding in me came the idea that at some point it would be the spirit of truth that would come and guide you. So you were kind of in this waiting pattern, you know, almost like an airplane out on the tarmac. You ready to take off, whatever that meant. And I can't really say that, you know, any particular thing that I did triggered that spirit of truth coming. And that's when I would say the mystical part of my journey started. And so oneness took on a different language, and it is a way of being now. It isn't a concept or idea or theory that I hold in mind. It's actually the state that I live in. So it's a little different.
How did you go from concept, theory, mind, understanding of unity to the space of living in a state of oneness?
I would say that when I was in this investigating period, that I would have glimpses of unity. And one of the examples that I always use is, I used to scull when I lived in Paris. And I would be on I didn't just do it singly, there were other people in the boat with me as well. And I don't know if you've ever done this before, but when you first start off, there are like 4 people, you know, rowing, and it's kind of all over the place. It's really uncomfortable. You're trying to get a rhythm with the other people in the boat. It's just not happening. You're getting exhausted. All your strength is being used. And then all of a sudden, a bit of flow comes into it, and you pick up a rhythm with the other people in the boat, and all of a sudden you have this awareness of who's rowing this boat now. Once you hit that place of synchronicity with everyone else, not only the people who are in the boat, but the actual rhythm that you have to get with the oar and these kinds of things. And so I started to get glimpses in my everyday life of what I thought unity was. And so I could hold to those, and I could see that and sometimes you can only hold this, for a half a mile or something, and then your mind enters into it and the whole thing collapses and you're rowing the boat again. But you have these moments of, there's no effort, it's like gliding. And so that kind of helped me to sort of know what it was that I was actually moving towards. These everyday experience. And I always talk to people that you've had an experience of unity. You know what oneness already is. You've glimpsed it, you've had moments of it. And through that, I was able to expand that a bit so that it wasn't, I didn't have to be sculling, or it just started to enter into my everyday life, where I could see that, when I would meet someone, I could meet them as, Lynn, and present that persona to a person, or I could just meet them more as an energy, put together in a certain kind of way so that it looks like Lynn, and see just what would happen if we met in that kind of way. And I could start to see that there was far more harmony if I could just kind of drop my identity for a while and just sort of be, in that moment with that person. And, still there's a, very similar dialogue that would happen or whatever, but it just became easier for me to be with people, and eventually my life would change and I would find myself no longer in my studio being a hermit and sent out into the world where I would go to work and every day I met 10, 15 new people that I had to interact with. And so I was always using, whatever I could to try to keep this underlying principle of harmony that I actually think has to do with unity and oneness. Where I tried to keep a concord and an agreement with people when I was with them. So it was, I practiced in this kind of way in the beginning until I actually, had what I would call the experience of that, where I wasn't making a conscious effort with unity and oneness, but it just became a state of being for me.
Could you describe what that state of being is?
That's really, really hard for me. I'm sure some people can, but it's sort of like an awareness for me that doesn't wander. And I don't say, anytime I try to say something, I never think this really makes sense to people. Before, when my mind was really active and present all of the time, I could wander when I was with people. I would be listening, but not really listening. I would be somewhere else, deep in thought, And now there's just this awareness that my whole surrounding is as much a part of me as, the form that's sitting in this chair. There aren't these boundaries and definitions that, I used to have about this is the chair and this is Lynn and I'm in a room and, there's lights and cameras and other people and this kind of thing. So it's just an awareness that I'm always in that doesn't wander is the only way that I can really describe it. So even though you're sitting across from me in this chair, dimensionally, within my consciousness, that isn't how it is for me. Even though perceptually I see you across from me, in consciousness you aren't really that way for me. So it's very hard for me to describe really this quality of being, that we call oneness. I've never really been able to formulate a meaning for it, that can really articulate what it is for me.
If you're in that state, how does it impact how you operate in the relative world? If you're driving a car or you're trying to order a sandwich.
It's just this unwavering awareness. It is in whatever it is that you're doing. And because time collapses so much in these states, I can drive from the desert to Los Angeles, and let's say it's supposed to take an hour and 15 minutes. I just don't have the awareness of the hour and 15 minutes. I'm in the desert, and then I'm in Los Angeles. So
it must be nice for those long flights to India if you have that kind of lack of awareness of time.
Yeah. So it's hard to describe how it is. I tell people sometimes it's like when I'm in the desert and I've been there for a number of days, and I start I turn off my telephone and I'm not going to answer emails, and I just really have, again, this same awareness, but I've made an intention to kind of bring it in a bit, let's say. And you can actually feel then this oneness as well, where if I'm walking from one of the houses on my property to the other, there isn't this particular kind of earthbound contact then. You actually sense the idea that it is just energy moving, in space in a way. So you are able to lose your sense of yourself that you call by the name Lynn, or, Emmanuel or whatever.
So your ego consciousness, that you are something.
It's just gone. And so then you're just moving in space as energy. And it isn't really that much different than how we, I'm sure if somebody saw me, they would perceive it as I'm walking across the desert, just like I do every day from one building to the next. But in consciousness, it has a very different feeling. So that's why I think it's so hard for me to describe this state, because it has so much more to do with feeling than actually a thought. I'm going from my kitchen, I'm going to walk across the desert to my bedroom. And before I was aware that my body was taking me from point A to point B. That awareness isn't so much there when I'm in this connected place. So I don't know if that makes sense to you or not.
When you say that you can tell people that everyone's had an experience of oneness, most likely that experience has not been kind of for a long period of time, right?
It's a glimpse.
It's a glimpse. So what do people do with that glimpse?
Well, for me, I practiced with that glimpse because, it took what was a concept for me, brought it into the realm of experience, and then I was like, I can hold on to this now. So it was something I could remember. So this is where remembrance comes in, where I could actually feel what that was like. And so I could create a scenario, like I said, of going into a room with 10 people that I don't know, and I am not going to have a sense of, a lack of self-esteem or self-worth, or what am I doing in this room with all these really, people who had reached a very high level in their profession, and some of the things that keep people separate when they walk into a room, with 10 people, all that conditioning that, kicks in. So I was able to kind of quiet that and try to see, now I want to connect with all of these people the same way I did in that boat. The principle has to be the same. A rhythm has to come. I could use the things that happened in the boat to help me connect with all of these people so that I felt in harmony with what was going on in the room. Whereas before that, I always felt a little bit like odd person out. My skills of, social chit-chat weren't so well developed. I've never been someone who was particularly fond of gossip and telling stories about people. So, and when you go into workplaces, a lot of times this is what you experience. So now when I work with people, and they ask me, how do you do this? I say, what will usually happen in the beginning is you will go into the workplace and you will find that you will have isolated yourself and you will be somewhat excluded in the beginning as people are trying to get some kind of feeling for someone who isn't going to do the typical workplace behavior, which, isn't always nice. And so they try this idea of connecting individually with a person more in an energetic kind of way, where that person will sense that you're not a threat, or you're not going to feel less of that person if your work performance that day isn't, up to snuff or whatever. And so this is how I did it. I'm going to go into work, I'm going to do the best job that I can, I'm going to stay focused and attentive and aware of what is actually going on around me. Prior to having this glimpse of unity, I probably would have stayed in the background, been very shy, very quiet, not wanting to engage at all with other people unless I really had to, because I'm actually quite shy. So it was a way for me to bring what I had experienced inwardly out. And there was just a nice exchange and flow.
Did people respond in a different way?
Yeah. And sometimes I would be, working on a model, and she would actually ask me, what is going on here? Because the connection, you can actually feel it.
So while you're putting makeup on a model, she feels what's going on.
She could energetically feel that there was some other kind of connection between us other than what she was used to when she went to work. So I played with all of it to see, okay, if this is true, if we're going to say that unity, that there is this interconnected whole, none of us are separate from that, then, and if that's reality, I want to know what that looks like here, now.
Not in meditation.
No, I want it here, now, in my everyday life. I want to know what it's like when I walk outside of my kitchen door, that I don't feel any difference between when I was in the kitchen and outside of the kitchen. I want, because it is all one connected whole. Every time I talk like this, I feel like a crazy person trying to explain this, because I could never keep anything in the theoretical, just understand it through knowledge or something. I felt that if this is true, there has to be a model for that. There has to be visible pictures of these things. And I think a lot of, this global oneness project is, you will see people who are going to show you models, whether they're economic models or social models or business models, where they're taking this particular concept of unity that was just a theory for so long, and they're going to show you, look at how it works out here in the world. So from a mystical, spiritual point of view, there isn't an inner and an outer to any of this at a certain point in your unfoldment. So I wanted to know what happens when this merges and it is in union and it is what I am, and that's my true nature. So when I connect with people, I want it to be that, because that's what I do now. I sit in a chair and I sit in meditation with people. So we connect on the inner plane. But then when we come out of meditation, I offer tea and a cookie and an inquiry into these meanings. What is in back of them and what is behind them, and where are they in your everyday life? And are you willing to be a bit excluded and isolate yourself for a while until people come to you, because of whatever it is that you're radiating becomes attractive to them because it feels good. You're not, like I said, a threat or whatever. And a lot of times in the room that I used to do my work in, I would find that people always wanted to come and just sit and hang out, and it was sort of like a peaceful place for them, because as soon as they went back out to do their job, it was total chaos for them. So I know that energetically that you can create this same, principle of harmony, where there will be concord and agreement in any space that you're in, whether you're seemingly alone in it or, because this is the idea of the one and the many. and how some people seem to think that these are two different things. For me, the one and the many are one and the same. So you can create a space that reflects that, so that everyone that comes into it, and that's like when you sit in meditation, and you know, sometimes as a group, when you come out of meditation, you're all just like, you knew that you would reach that place where you weren't separate.
Or just like
from
with the
each
oars in the boat, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
meditation, it could be
Yeah.
in life.
Yeah. So for me, that was my effort, you know, that I would say that I made. But I would say, you know, for the mystical part of it, it was a grace that came, that just, so that I don't leave that any longer, that's just what my awareness is. Because you know, on a mystical path or a spiritual path, there's a lot of coming and going, and you know, you reach a certain place and you hold it for a moment, and then it's gone. Like I said, these glimpses, and sometimes you get a better grasp on it, but then it leaves again. So it's more that now that I don't move in so much in the world of glimpse and grasp anymore.
What do you think you can get beyond a certain place where you've just had glimpses without grace?
Yeah, you can get to a grasp. And then after a grasp, like I said, with this practice where I would go into my workplace, let's say, and it was an exercise for me that I did. And I had to make a really conscious effort. And you know, the business that I was in, it was really easy to be uncomfortable because you're with such fabulous people all of the time.
This is kind of the fashion industry?
Yeah, you know, movie people, you know, and also a lot of my work, I worked with real people, but they were famous real people. So, you know, and, you know, I didn't have any kind of sense of myself like that. I was very directed, though, I must say. This was an all-consuming passion of mine, was to get home. And even though if you saw my life, you would have thought it was just like everyone else's. You know, I went to the movies, I had friends, I traveled a lot with my work. You know, it was very demanding, it was very stressful. But there was just always something that was kind of moving me. And I think it was, I would get these glimpses, and then there would be like this, wow, that's pretty cool. Because I was studying this also from science through physics and things like this, I was getting all of these verifications of, wow, that really is true. As bizarre as that sounds, that we can live in a fourth dimensional sense of ourselves on this plane if we can just untangle the structure of time that we all live in and only use it for what it was intended for, you know, to get us from point A to B on time for appointments and whatever, and break the structure that kept us so bound. And just little things like, I'm not going to extend my life any further than a week. You know, start there. I'm not going to extend my life any more than 5 days until my life is just today. I'm not extending it into tomorrow, and I'm not going to go back to yesterday. These are things that you can practice that will show you that there is this moment that is, and it's not changing. And it's time that makes you think that you're having many moments that lead to, you know, minutes and hours and days and years kind of thing.
Do you think that this reference you had of science you were studying that kind of proved in a certain way this experience of oneness was obviously was very helpful.
Yes.
Do you think that for other people there are references that they can make?
They have them. You have everything that you need for your unfoldment.
And when you say unfoldment, you mean your own?
Whatever your unique journey is, everything that you need to, because not everyone is interested in what I am. I was interested in getting home. I wanted...
And home is?
The source from which I came. I wanted the return. I wanted to go back to origin. And these are not only concepts, mystical concepts, they're in science. If you watch a rose do what a rose does, it's showing you, the same journey. You go on that same journey. And it's like a circle within a circle, and you're always coming back in on yourself, renewed. And so we seemingly only have this lifetime. And so you think that you have this expanse of time that you're going to do it in. I have found that you die daily, that you do this process every single day. And so, that's how I started with it. I realize now that, it's different than that, but when I say that I would practice things that would, help me to, to just sort of collapse a concept that I was holding. And the concept of death is one that we all hold. And so, science would give me let's say a principle that would say that, is that really true? And then, the mystical part would give me its idea where the soul is eternal. So I would kind of work with both of them to see, and then this process of glimpsing and grasping until, die before you die happens to you. And you're very much aware that your identity or your sense of self has died, but you're still here, and you didn't go anywhere really. So I'm with the assumption now that when the physical body decides it's time to depart, it'll just be the same thing. But there isn't going to be this huge shift for me. Because my experiences of death up to this point, from a mystical point of view, I'm assuming it'll be quite similar, when the body decides to leave.
Up until now, we seem to be talking mostly about the personal.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about how what's happening in the world has anything to do with what we've just been discussing about personal experience of oneness?
I think, for me, what I see is that when I was saying that we have these particular individual structures within ourselves that have to kind of fall apart in some kind of way as truth comes into your experience, I find that the same thing is just going on, that there are existing structures that have, been formulated. They've been around for a very long time. And there are so many people who have such a different awareness in consciousness now that the old structure that has to do with a consciousness that isn't so evolved, that we're just watching it kind of dissipate and come down. And unfortunately, it seems to be taking a very violent, you can see it as very violent if you want to. But I just find for myself that when a structure lacks integrity, all it can do is collapse in on itself. And that's more how I see what's going on. That all of these shifts, can we continue to see two realities, war and peace? And that's how people see. or actually probably a lot of people only see war. They haven't, like I said, even glimpsed what this peace is that can come as you deconstruct, a concept. But more and more people have an awareness, they have glimpsed or grasped peace on, as an individual, on an inner, and then they've manifested it in their lives in that same kind of way, where there's this harmony that is in their life, there's concord and agreement with everyone that they're in contact with. So I see that these steps that we make individually are the same steps that are going on in the world. We're just trying to arrive in the same place where you arrive individually in consciousness. We're trying to arrive there universally in consciousness, so that the more you have an understanding of unity and oneness, then you send that out and you live your life in that kind of way, and it influences your children. And I think over the years we've reached a place that there are an awful lot of people who will not stay within structures that lack integrity. So we have things, the whistleblower that makes us all aware that this particular corporation, is far more corrupt, than you could ever possibly think. So it crumbles. So now other corporations are having to go, ooh, we better get a little bit of integrity here in our business, because look what happened. So I think it'll be like a domino type effect. And the same with, economics. Can we continue to think that, we can insulate ourselves and just think that our individual economy isn't, having any kind of universal effect? And it is. So I see the same principles being used individually as well as on a universal or a global way. And there's key words. What is the intention? Does it have integrity? Has it taken into consideration the whole? Or is it only, concerned with its own little unit? And, when you're in that little unit thing, there's usually an agenda and whatever. And so it's like I said, it's very, those kinds of structures, I think, are the ones that will probably have to collapse if you want to continue to think of yourself as a separate unit. I think those are the ones that are slowly finding that they can't, stay together. So I think people have known for a long time that we are much more interconnected than we think. But perhaps they felt as an individual there wasn't anything that they could do about it. But then we have people that have come forth and made kind of like class action type things, where a group has decided, look, we're going to take on that factory, upstream, and see if we can do something about it. And they've been able to do that by using the law.
Do you think a lot of what needs to change will be brought about by people who come forward?
Yes, I only think any of this can happen by individuals who are outside of actually the structure that has to come down.
So you don't think the structures themselves will change? It'll be the people who force them to change?
I haven't seen any change. I've seen cosmetic changes, but I haven't seen any, changes at all. I mean, it's, so much of the work that I do with people, is the feminine present at the table with any kind of dialogue, global dialogue that is going on. And I don't mean, is there a woman in the room? I mean, is she the attributes that she has, are they part of the dialogue? Within the process, within the thinking and the feeling of around what is being discussed, is anyone thinking about consequences that have, what it's going to do down the line to people. And
And those are the attributes?
she would do that because, she has attributes of, compassion and mercy and tolerance and forgiveness and all of these things. So if you're sitting in a room and they're discussing a strategy for, are we going to bomb, this particular community because there's 4 potential terrorists, in this town, and they decide they are, and then you have casualties far greater than these suspected 4, and then you find out they're not even there. For me, I'm just like, well, maybe we should have had 4 terrorists and found another day, when we were sure that they were in the room, rather than, blow up a village, based on intelligence. So that's kind of what I mean.
The integration of these attributes into the way that we approach systems and everything that makes this world run.
Yeah, responsible for our actions, that, and yes, we can say we had good intelligence, but obviously, sometimes it isn't good intelligence. So you have to define what good intelligence is, maybe. You have to maybe redefine the meaning of that. But I stay out of the political part of all of this. Like I said, I work with people primarily individually so that they can go into their workplace and, like I said, be this isolated, excluded person for a while until people see that, oh, they're offering another way. And so that when I go to their office, there's this big, relief to just be sitting with someone who is at peace within themselves. And then a dialogue can start to happen between these people of what can we do about what's outside of this office? I mean, we work in this building, and then maybe you get another person, and before you know it, all of the people that were causing, the office stress decide to go to another corporation to work at, so that at least maybe your department, has found this unity, this way of being together where there's concord and agreement. But also knowing that anytime there's to be a creative endeavor, that you have to be able to dialogue in a way that, if it sounds foolish, it's okay. And a lot of times now in the office place, people don't want to say anything because they think they're going to be perceived as foolish. But creativity happens from spontaneous ideas just being thrown on a table, as silly as they sound, but maybe the person next to you can refine what you threw out on the table, and someone else can, and so you end up creating this huge spaciousness instead of everybody being quiet and not wanting
collective intelligence.
So it's, and I do this, because I sit in group meditation with people, and we do something that's called inquiry. And it's a similar thing where we take a particular concept and I give it the week before. Everyone goes home, they sit in meditation, they do like a contemplation or a ponder on this. And when we have tea the next week after meditation, we discuss that. And if we discuss it in a certain kind of way, the energy in the room gets really contracted. Everyone is like, ugh, and we've found that if we discuss it in a way that we have a great deal of respect for each other, and whatever anyone is going to say is valid. There's this huge spaciousness that's created, and the exchange then actually offers light to people instead of just getting this conflict between two people if I don't agree with what you've just said. So it's more the idea that everyone gets to say whatever they want. There isn't any agreement or disagreement. It's just what you've said. And then we start to work off what's been, said around the table until we arrive at a place where there is this, you can actually feel it get spacious. You actually feel that it has light to us. All of a sudden, we're not feeling all heavy. And a lot of times, the concept could be, if I say repentance to people, they're just like, get away from me. They don't want to have anything to do with it. So sometimes the words are highly charged, and they can, have a lot of, there can be conflict around them and resistance around them. And so all these things are the same when you're in business or
politics.
It's the same thing. How do we speak to each other where we create space and light? So I'm using it on a very small level, with people. But I don't see any reason why because these are concepts around unity and oneness. That's what my experience has shown me, is that there isn't any reason why I can't use everything that was given to me during this experience that I had around unity and oneness, why it cannot translate into every aspect of life.